In the shadowed halls of Europe's greatest palaces, portraits hang like silent witnesses to humanity's darkest experiment. Each gilded frame contains a face, progressively more haunting than the last. Eyes that stare into nothing. Jaws that jut at impossible angles. Features so distorted they seem carved by nightmare itself. These are not the faces of peasants struck by disease or accident. These are royals, the so-called chosen of God, the purest bloodlines in human history. But purity, as we shall discover, can become poison. Walk through any royal portrait gallery in Vienna, Madrid, or Versailles, and you'll notice something deeply unsettling. The older the dynasty, the stranger the faces become. What begins as noble beauty slowly transforms into something else. Something that whispers of genetic secrets hidden behind velvet curtains and golden crowns. Tonight, we uncover 7 faces that reveal the most horrifying truth about European royalty. That in their obsession with keeping blood pure, they created monsters. Not the kind that lurk in shadows, but the kind that sat on thrones, ruling millions while their own bodies betrayed the very concept of human evolution. What you're about to discover will change how you see every royal portrait, every noble lineage, every claim of blue blood forever. Because sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we call Your Majesty. To understand how Europe's mightiest dynasties destroyed themselves, we must first understand their twisted logic. For over 1,000 years, European royalty operated under a single catastrophic belief. That royal blood was literally divine, blessed by God himself, and that mixing it with common blood would dilute its sacred power. This wasn't mere arrogance. This was religious doctrine. Kings and queens genuinely believed they were genetically closer to God than ordinary humans. To marry outside their bloodline wasn't just politically unwise. It was spiritual contamination. The practice began innocently enough. Cousins marrying cousins to secure alliances. But as generations passed, the gene pool grew smaller and smaller. Brothers married sisters. Uncles married nieces. Eventually, some royal children had family trees that looked more like telephone poles. The Habsburgs of Austria perfected this practice. For 6 centuries, they married within their own family with religious devotion. Court physicians began noticing peculiar traits appearing in Habsburg children. Protruding lower jaws, enlarged tongues, severe mental disabilities. But rather than seeing these as warning signs, courtiers praised them as noble features that proved the family's divine heritage. The Habsburg jaw became a badge of honor. The more deformed a child appeared, the more purely royal they were considered. What we now recognize as severe genetic defects were celebrated as proof of bloodline superiority. Ancient Egyptian pharaohs had practiced similar traditions. Roman emperors had married their own sisters. But European royalty took this genetic experimentation to levels that would have made even Cleopatra recoil in horror. By the 1600s, some royal bloodlines had become so contaminated that their children were barely recognizable as human. Yet the marriages continued. The rituals persisted. And 7 individuals emerged from this centuries-long genetic catastrophe as the ultimate proof of what happens when power refuses to acknowledge the basic laws of nature. Let us now examine the 7 most genetically compromised royals in European history, each one a stepping stone deeper into biological horror. First, Ferdinand I of Austria. Born in 1793, Ferdinand's skull was so malformed that he suffered constant seizures. His jaw protruded so severely he could barely speak intelligibly. Court records describe a man who required constant supervision, yet he ruled the Austrian Empire for 18 years. His marriage to his own cousin produced no children. His body had become too damaged to continue the bloodline. Second, Maria Anna of Austria. Ferdinand's sister and fellow victim of Habsburg genetics. Born with severe mental disabilities and physical deformities, so pronounced that she was hidden from public view her entire life. She lived to age 84, a walking testament to the Habsburg family's genetic collapse, spending decades in isolated palace rooms while her brother ruled an empire. Third, Joanna of Castile. Known as Joanna the Mad, her insanity wasn't madness at all. It was the psychological result of severe inbreeding. She would speak to her dead husband's corpse for hours, convinced he was still alive. Her behavior became so erratic that she was locked away for decades, yet she technically remained Queen of Spain until her death. Fourth, the Infanta Margaret Teresa, a Habsburg princess whose portraits reveal the true horror of genetic accumulation. Her lower jaw extended so far beyond her upper jaw that she couldn't close her mouth. Her tongue, enlarged and malformed, hung constantly from her lips. She died at age 21, her body unable to survive the genetic catastrophe of her bloodline. Fifth, Maximilian II of Bavaria. His inbreeding coefficient, a measure of genetic similarity between parents, was higher than that typically seen between father and daughter. Born with multiple skeletal deformities, severe learning disabilities, and a condition that left him unable to produce coherent speech. He communicated primarily through gestures and lived in constant physical pain. Sixth, Charles II of Spain, perhaps the most infamous victim of royal inbreeding. His tongue was so large he could barely eat solid food. His jaw was so deformed he couldn't chew. He was intellectually disabled, physically weak, and impotent. Court physicians described him as more dead than alive. His family tree showed that his parents were more closely related than the average brother and sister. He was the last of the Spanish Habsburg line, his body literally too damaged to produce an heir. Seventh, the unnamed child of Philip IV. The most horrifying case of all. Born to Philip IV of Spain and his own niece, this infant lived only 3 months. Court records, sealed for centuries, describe deformities so severe that the child was hidden from even the royal court. Multiple limb malformations, organ defects, and neurological damage, so extensive that survival was impossible. This child represented the absolute endpoint of genetic accumulation, a human being so damaged by inbreeding that life itself became unsustainable. Each case reveals how genetic defects accumulated and intensified across generations. What began as minor jaw irregularities evolved into complete physical and mental breakdown. But here's the truly chilling revelation. They knew. For centuries, historians assumed that royal inbreeding continued due to ignorance. That medieval and Renaissance courts simply didn't understand genetics. But recently discovered documents tell a far more sinister story. Court physicians as early as the 1400s had documented the connection between close family marriages and birth defects. Spanish court records from 1580 show detailed medical observations linking Habsburg jaw deformities to excessive family breeding. Venetian diplomatic reports describe Austrian court physicians secretly advising against certain marriages due to bloodline contamination risks. Yet the marriages continued. Why? Because political power mattered more than human suffering. Newly uncovered Vatican documents reveal that Catholic Church officials were presented with medical evidence of genetic damage as early as 1520, but chose to continue sanctifying incestuous royal marriages because these unions secured church political alliances. French court records show that advisors to Louis XIV calculated that genetic risks were acceptable losses compared to the political benefits of keeping bloodlines pure. They weren't ignorant, they were coldly calculating. The most damning evidence comes from Austrian state archives. Letters between Habsburg court physicians detailing specific genetic defects they expected from planned marriages, written decades before those marriages produced the exact deformities predicted. They knew that Charles II would be severely disabled before he was even conceived. They knew that continuing Habsburg intermarriage would destroy the Spanish royal line. They knew that children would suffer and die. And they did it anyway. This wasn't ignorance. It was one of history's most callous conspiracies. For centuries, European royal courts systematically sacrificed the health, sanity, and lives of their own children to maintain political power structures. They turned human beings into genetic experiments, treating royal children like breeding stock in service of abstract concepts of bloodline purity. The ultimate revelation: every deformed royal child, every mentally disabled prince, every princess who died in agony, they were all preventable tragedies, sacrificed on the altar of political ambition. In the end, the very practice meant to preserve these dynasties destroyed them completely. The Spanish Habsburgs died out when Charles II proved too genetically damaged to produce an heir. The Austrian line survived only by abandoning inbreeding practices in the 1700s. Most European royal families that continued these traditions simply vanished. The irony is absolute. In trying to keep their blood pure, they contaminated it beyond repair. But as we close this dark chapter of human history, we must ask ourselves uncomfortable questions. What other noble traditions have we blindly accepted that future generations will view with similar horror? How many modern practices are we defending today that systematically sacrifice individual human welfare for collective power structures? Genetic engineering, designer babies, social systems that prioritize bloodline wealth over human potential. Perhaps the most disturbing truth isn't that royal courts once treated humans as breeding experiments. It's that we might still be doing it today, just with different names and justifications. The next time you see a royal portrait, look carefully at those eyes. They're not staring into the distance with noble dignity. They're staring at us across the centuries, asking why we allowed it to happen, and wondering what horrors we're allowing today that we're too blind to see.